Another fighter who's providing for his family is Michael Bisping, and in his hotel room he outlines the importance of respect to fighters in the UFC.
Respect is very, very important. You know, it's of the utmost importance. You know, obviously you've got to have respect for your opponent. If you don't have respect for your opponent, then obviously you're not going to train accordingly. You know, but I don't think that's what you're talking about. You know, respect for judges and the sport and everything. Fighters UFC fighters try and conduct themselves with respect. Most do anyway, I think, and try and behave accordingly inside the octagon. I think a lot of it that stems from, you know, this sport used to get quite a beating in the public's eye, you know, human cockfighting, all the rest of it. So now fighters go out there and, you know, if they go out there and they put on a great fight, but then afterwards, they maybe attack their opponent after the bell, you know, which happens, things like that. People are going to look and they're going to think, well, you know, these are just a set of thugs. This isn't a sport to be taken seriously. So, you know, that's one side of it. Obviously, you know, the referee, you know, people don't always agree with what the referee has to say, but you know, the referee's in a difficult position. You know, and they do a great job, but you know, you've got to, you know, the referee's paid to be there, and his word's final, really. If you disagree with the judges, there's not a lot you can do. It's done. You know, there's no point standing there and crying like a baby, and you know what's done is done, and you ain't gonna reverse the decision. Yeah, you can maybe do a few interviews afterwards and whatever, you know, but ultimately nothing's going to change that decision, you know. And yeah, there is some bad decisions sometimes, you know, but it's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. You know, we all try and stop our opponents and not let it go to the judges. Some judges, you know, you've no idea what they're looking for, whether they're from more of a striking, boxing background or from a wrestling background, you know. So you never know how you can please them or what they're looking for, you know. They seem to have individual criteria of what, you know, they deem as winning a fight. You know, so it's just the way it goes. You know, you roll the dice. You know, it goes to the judges, you roll the dice, and you know, you've got to be a man about it. And
if you compared that to, say, like Drogba after the Chelsea match, where he's shouting and spitting into the camera and calling the referee off.
Oh, I see. Yeah, well.
Compared to that, do you think that it's important for fighters, because their sport seems so much more brutal than football, to conduct themselves almost in a better way?
I'm not sure if that's a conscious decision, that why we do that. I think, to be honest, that's just the way we are. A lot of what we do, you know, we do mixed martial arts. We do martial arts, you know, as well as boxing and wrestling and things. And a lot of it's all about respect. You know, you've got to have respect. You know, when you're training, it's all about respect for your training partners and things like that. Otherwise, you're going to have no training partners to train with, and you know, it's just how you conduct yourself in life. And I think, for example, Drogba, is it? Yeah, that was you know, he should be ashamed of himself, especially being a football player. You know, being a fighter, yeah, a small minority of people might look up to us or whatever, but footballers, you know, every kid was, you know, in England or around the world pretty much wants to grow up to be a professional footballer. You know, and they look up to them as idols, and the guys spitting and swearing and pushing and punching people and stuff, you know, in a football match. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, they should be ashamed of themselves, really. You know, and if they're such tough guys, then maybe a change of sport might be in order.
That night, I take a walk around the strip, thinking about what Michael had said about how important it was for fighters to provide a good example for young fans. In a sport as brutal as the UFC, it seemed even more important for him to show he was no thug. The next morning, I go to the open workouts to speak to the fighter Mike Bisping will be facing on Saturday night, Dan Henderson. What do you think? There's been a lot of trash talking before this fight. What do you think about that?
What's he said?
There's been a lot of, like, you know, he's been insulting you, you've been insulting him.
I've only said one thing, and just called him a douchebag. Other than that, I mean, he is a bit of a douchebag. He's just, you know, not somebody I'd hang out with. He's not a bad person, but I think it's, you know, obviously he's probably been called that in the past, and from my understanding, it's pretty much a consensus around the world.
So you're not breaking new ground here?
No, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that he's, you know.
So that's your honest opinion, that you're not just doing that to talk the fight up? You honestly think?
No, he's a bit of a douchebag. He's not a bad person or anything. He's not somebody I'd want to hang out with that often, or, you know.
Do you feel more motivated if you don't like your opponent?
No. You know, I don't dislike him. You know, I think he's an okay guy. Like I said, he's just somebody that I wouldn't be hanging out with that much. But, you know, he talks a little bit too much for my liking. But, you know, I don't know if I've fought anybody that I've disliked, really. I like everybody almost, but he's probably he's not somebody that he's not a guy that I like, so to speak, but I don't dislike him at all. I'm out there purely, it's a business and a sport to me, and if I'm playing my best friend in a game of pool, I'm still going to try and beat his ass at pool. So this is my job, though, so I'm going to go out there no matter who it is and try and win.